China is further easing its COVID-19 restrictions following recent widespread protests. Commuters in major cities such as Shenzhen and Beijing won't have to show negative COVID tests in order to take public transit. China remains the only major nation still sticking to a COVID-0 strategy, and that has led to public frustrations as entire communities were locked down, sometimes for weeks, after even just one positive case. The anger then boiled over last week in several days of protests, with demonstrators demanding an easing of the COVID-19 curbs. So let's turn now to Teng Biao, a human rights activist and a lawyer. He's been arrested several times in China for his dissenting activities. He left the country in 2014 and is now living in exile in the United States. Teng Biao joins us from Princeton, New Jersey. Sir, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Can I get your reaction to those protests last week? Because we seldom see that much outright aggression from the general public against the Chinese government.
Yeah, that kind of protests have not been seen in China for 33 years since Tiananmen Massacre, the Tiananmen Democracy Movement. And this time, hundreds of thousands of people took to the street to demand the end of zero COVID policy. And in Shanghai, Chengdu, and some other cities, people were chanting for democracy and freedom, and even the step down of Communist Party and Xi Jinping. So that's really, really rare, and that would bring a profound impact to China's political future.
Let's talk about that political future. Xi has given himself a third term. This is unprecedented. Many are worried about the creeping movement towards becoming a dictatorship. How do you interpret his position?
For the past decade, Xi Jinping has turned China from what I call a small group dictatorship to a one-man dictatorship. And he incited the nationalism sentiment and the cultural personality around himself. And now nobody in the Communist Party is able to challenge his personal power. And then that's why it's so difficult in China to end the zero COVID policy. And people know that the Macron, the Omicron and the COVID is not so serious now, and then only China has that zero COVID policy, and many Chinese people are soccer fans watching the FIFA, the World Cup football, and they see that 60,000 people gathering to enjoy the soccer game, and then they were shocked. So this wave of protest, we call it the A4 revolution or white paper revolution, has challenged Xi Jinping's authority, Xi Jinping's power very much. But it seems it's not likely to have a political transition towards democracy soon.
We know that Xi, or at least the government, is bringing in these emergency levels of censorship to make sure that people inside China don't know what's happening in terms of the demonstration. Do you think that this could be something like Iran, where protests that start about the morality police and the death of one woman, they spark into a much larger movement against the regime? Is it possible we're seeing the same sort of thing happening in China?
The Chinese Communist Party censors information very much, and Xi Jinping has intensified the censorship on media and internet. But for the past 3 years, almost 3 years, people in China have experienced so much pain and so much frustration and anger, and they were locked down at their own home, and they lost their jobs, and people are starving, and even like patients are refused to go to hospital, and then people died on the way to hospital, and some people starved to death. So and then the fire in Urumqi killed at least 10 Uyghurs, maybe more than 40 Uyghurs, was the trigger event, and sparked people's anger and frustration. And then we see the A4 revolution um, appeared in many, at least 30 cities and in China. Um, that's but the Communist Party would use violence to crush the movement, the revolution. And I heard this morning that the detained protesters were brutally tortured, and that so that would and the authorities will arrest more protesters, and many of them would get sentences, maybe 2 years or 5 years or longer.
Mr. Teng, before I let you go, we've been seeing considerable reporting here in Canada of the Chinese government allegedly trying to interfere in our federal elections, of interfering with particular candidates, possibly offering them money, and even setting up, for lack of a better phrase, Chinese police forces to monitor the activities of Chinese citizens or people of ethnic Chinese descent living in Canada. What can you tell us about that? What's your read of the situation?
Yeah, I have been documenting China's transnational repression, and the recent report about the police stations established in Canada, United States, and European countries. And that was just an example of how Chinese government expands its influence and its violence of human rights in many countries. And the Communist Party wants to make sure the international environment is always in favor of the authoritarian, totalitarian regime. And I myself experienced that harassment by the Chinese government, and many students and scholars living in free countries are monitored and sometimes harassed by the Chinese held officials or their spies and the informants. There are so many
Sir, forgive me for
such
interrupting.
cases.
I just want to be sure I understand. You've been harassed while living in the United States?
Yes, yeah, I received that threat on social media, and I was I was harassed in front of my house by a former the supporters of a former Chinese spy, and my cell phone, my laptop always encounter the government backed hacking attempt, and my talks was canceled because of the pressure from Chinese Students and Scholars Association, like that. There are so many such examples.
So what keeps you going, sir, when you're in danger, when you've had to flee the country of your birth, when there are spies seemingly all around and people who would like to hurt you? What keeps you going?
Before I left China, I was kidnapped by the secret police for 3 times and detained and severely tortured. But I think it's my duty, it's my moral duty to speak out, to tell the truth. And I am a human rights lawyer and intellectual, and I should promote rule of law and democracy in China. And now I'm living in a free country. I have more responsibility to speak up for the voiceless and the powerless. And if China, this kind of powerful authoritarian regime is not stopped, and then it harms not only the freedom of Chinese people, but the people all over the world.
Mr. Teng Biao, I admire your discipline, your principles, your bravery, and I thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.